Left to die among monsters, she faces her darkest moment, as dozens of beasts converge on their shelter, just as rescue ships appear overhead. With Grant wounded but fighting, she summons her mysterious power, focusing her wristband's blue energy into a directed beam. Their combined defense, his weapons, and her light, breaks the monster's charge, marking Shi's transformation from helpless child to powerful ally. Rain pounded the jungle canopy, each droplet a tiny missile hammering against massive black leaves. Water cascaded down trunks as thick as buildings, creating curtains of moisture that distorted the already dim light, filtering through the dense foliage. Somewhere in the distance, thunder growled like the warning of some ancient predator, echoing through the labyrinth of vegetation. In this hostile world of shadows and storm, a small figure huddled beneath the arching roots of a colossal tree. The child's skin was pale purple, almost luminescent in the gloom. Her large eyes, 3 of them, blinking rapidly as she struggled to calm her racing heartbeat. She was just 7 cycles old, and until yesterday, she had never known true terror. The transport crash replayed in her mind, the screech of tearing metal, the panicked cries of her people, the acrid stench of burning fuel. She had been thrown clear during impact, awakening alone amidst smoke and wreckage. Bodies lay strewn across the jungle floor, some still and silent, others dragged away by shapes that moved too quickly to follow. In the chaos of evacuation and attack, no one had noticed the small girl still clinging to life. She touched the metal band encircling her wrist, once a tracking device to ensure children like her didn't wander from refugee compounds. Now, the only remnant of her former life. It blinked red in steady, mocking pulses. Help should come when it signaled distress. But how long before they realized the transport was missing? How long before they would brave this terrible place to search for survivors? If any still lived besides her. The rain intensified, drumming against the canopy like impatient fingers. She hugged her knees tighter to her chest, shivering despite the humid heat. Something rustled in the underbrush nearby, something large. She held her breath, pressing herself against the gnarled wood at her back, willing herself to become invisible. A massive shape emerged from the foliage, a creature with 4 legs like tree trunks, each ending in claws that sank deep into the soft earth. Its body was covered in what looked like natural armor, black plates overlapping like scales, and its elongated head housed rows of jagged teeth visible even when its mouth was closed. It sniffed the air, turning toward Shi's hiding place with deliberate malice. Shi's band flashed once, brighter than before. The beast charged. With a cry that tore at her throat, Shi abandoned her shelter, darting between massive roots and plunging into the jungle. Her small size allowed her to squeeze through gaps in the vegetation that slowed her pursuer. But not for long. She could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind her, gaining with each thunderous step. Her legs burned with exertion as she splashed through puddles and leaped over fallen branches. The band continued to pulse red, useless, meaningless. No one was coming. No one cared that she was about to die. The ground beneath her feet suddenly gave way, and she found herself sinking into thick, clinging mud, a quagmire. She thrashed wildly, but each movement only pulled her deeper into the sucking mire. Exhaustion flooded her small body, and a wound on her leg, sustained in the crash but ignored in her flight, sent spikes of pain through her with each desperate struggle. The crashing sounds behind her stopped. She turned her head to see the beast regarding her with cold, predatory intelligence. It approached slowly now, testing the ground before each step, somehow knowing to avoid the treacherous mud that held its prey. Its jaws parted in what almost seemed like satisfaction. She closed her eyes. She was so tired, so very tired. If this was the end, at least the pain and fear would stop. Her people believed in an afterlife where the worthy joined the ancestors among the stars. Maybe her family was already there, waiting. The expected agony never came. Instead, a new sound cut through the drumming rain, a mechanical click followed by the unmistakable report of weapons fire. She's eyes snapped open to see a tall figure standing between her and the beast, armored in scorched black plating that suggested recent battle. The newcomer fired another controlled burst from a rifle that seemed an extension of their arm, and the monster reeled back, black fluid spurting from wounds in its armored hide. With an enraged roar, the creature charged. The figure stood their ground, continuing to fire with precision until the beast finally collapsed, its massive body sliding to a halt mere meters away. Only then did She's savior turn toward her. A helmet retracted with a soft hiss, revealing a human face, weather-beaten, scarred, but undeniably human. Male, she thought, though her knowledge of the species was limited. His eyes were a startling blue against his dark skin, and they widened slightly when they met her gaze. "Hold still," he said in a language she barely recognized from mandatory education modules. He approached, carefully, testing the ground with each step, just as the monster had done. When he reached her, strong hands gripped her under the arms and lifted her from the mud with surprising gentleness. Shy was too shocked to resist or respond. A human, here, saving her. The stories she'd been told about humans varied wildly. Some called them saviors, others oppressors. What was certain was that they were involved in the war that had forced her people from their home system. Yet this one had placed himself between her and death without hesitation. The human carried her through the rain-soaked jungle, his movements efficient and alert. She noticed the scorch marks on his armor weren't decorative. They were damage, recent and severe. He was wounded too. His breathing labored beneath the weight of his gear and her small body. They arrived at an enormous hollow tree, its interior carved out by time or some massive organism. The human ducked inside, setting She down on relatively dry ground before securing what looked like a camouflage tarp across the entrance. The space was immediately warmer, sheltered from the wind and rain, though water still dripped from the natural ceiling above. "Let me see that leg," he said, kneeling beside her. Ixi stared at him, uncomprehending or unwilling to understand. The wound on her leg throbbed, a jagged tear that had soaked her simple clothing with purple fluid. Her blood. The human sighed, then pointed to his own leg, made a pained expression, and pointed to hers. When she still didn't respond, he slowly reached for a pouch on his belt, telegraphing each movement to avoid frightening her. From it, he withdrew a small medical kit, holding up a sealed packet and pantomiming cleaning a wound. Finally, she extended her injured leg, wincing as she did so. The human worked quickly, but carefully, cleaning the gash with antiseptic wipes that stung fiercely, then applying a gel that immediately numbed the area. As he wrapped a bandage around her leg, she studied him more closely. His armor, despite its damage, was military grade, bearing insignia she didn't recognize. His movements suggested training and experience. Not a colonist or trader, then, but a soldier. What was a lone human soldier doing on this monster-infested world? "There," he said when he finished. "Not perfect, but it'll hold." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You understand anything I'm saying, kid?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. She understood some words, though speaking the human language was beyond her current ability. The man's face showed surprise, then something like relief. "Good. That's good." He sat back against the curved interior wall of their shelter, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Grant." He pointed to himself as he said it. "Grant." She blinked her 3 eyes in sequence, a gesture of acknowledgement among her people. After a moment's consideration, she pointed to herself and said simply, She. Grant repeated, pronouncing it correctly on the first try. He offered what appeared to be a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Nice to meet you, she. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. From another pouch, he produced a ration pack, breaking it in half and offering a portion to she. She accepted it cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar food before taking a small bite. It was bland, but not unpleasant, and she suddenly realized how hungry she was. She finished her portion quickly, watching as Grant ate his share with measured bites, his attention never fully leaving the covered entrance to their shelter. "Transport crash?" he asked between bites, gesturing vaguely upward. She nodded, the memory still raw. "Others?" She shook her head, her third eye closing completely, a sign of grief among her kind. Grant's expression darkened. "I'm sorry," he said, and though she couldn't understand the exact words, the tone conveyed his meaning. He reached into yet another compartment and withdrew a small device that emitted a soft glow, placing it between them. It provided both light and a gentle warmth that began to dry She's sodden clothes. Thunder continued to rumble outside, but within their hollow tree, a fragile sense of safety began to grow. She's terror gradually subsided, replaced by exhaustion. Her eyes grew heavy, and despite her best efforts to remain vigilant, she soon drifted into uneasy sleep. She awoke to a sound that made her blood freeze, a chittering, scraping noise just outside their shelter. Grant was already on his feet, rifle in hand, motioning for her to stay back. Two smaller creatures, similar to the beast that had chased her, but barely larger than she herself, were investigating the camouflaged entrance, their clawed appendages scratching at the material. With terrifying suddenness, they burst through, chittering in what sounded almost like excitement. Grant fired a short burst, catching one in mid-leap. The second landed on his shoulder, its jaws snapping at his helmet. She pressed herself against the far wall, a prayer to her ancestors rising unbidden to her lips. Grant grunted in pain, but managed to dislodge the creature, sending it tumbling across the ground. Before it could regain its footing, he dispatched it with a single shot. The sudden silence afterward felt almost as loud as the skirmish. "You okay?" Grant asked, turning to she. There was a new tear in his armor at the shoulder, dark fluid seeping from beneath, his blood, red and alien to her eyes. She pointed to the wound, her expression conveying concern that transcended language barriers. Grant glanced at his shoulder and shrugged. "I've had worse." He retrieved his medical kit and attempted to treat himself one-handed, struggling with the awkward angle. After watching his frustrated efforts, she hesitantly approached, gesturing that she could help. Grant studied her for a moment, then handed her the antiseptic wipe. "Just like I did for your leg," he said, demonstrating the motion. Shai nodded and carefully cleaned the wound, mimicking Grant's earlier actions with surprising dexterity. The human remained perfectly still, only the occasional tightening around his eyes betraying his discomfort. When she finished, he applied the numbing gel himself, then showed her how to secure a patch over the injury. "Not bad," he said when they were done. "You'd make a decent field medic." She didn't understand his words, but the approving tone made her duck her head in what might have been embarrassment or pleasure. It had been a long time since anyone had praised her for anything. The rain eventually subsided, though darkness was falling fast. Grant checked the perimeter of their shelter, reinforcing the damaged entrance with branches and leaves. He kept his rifle close at hand, positioned where he could grab it instantly if needed. "We should try to sleep," he told Ji, settling into a position that allowed him to watch both her and the entrance. "Tomorrow we'll figure something out." The uncertainty in his voice wasn't lost on she, but the fact that he included her in his plans provided a comfort she hadn't expected. The wristband continued to pulse red, its rhythm almost matching her heartbeat. She curled up on the ground, using her arm as a pillow, and watched Grant through half-closed eyes. The human didn't sleep immediately. Instead, he withdrew a small device from his belt, a data pad that illuminated his face with a soft blue glow. He scrolled through information, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he shut it off with a sigh and leaned his head back against the tree wall. Only then did his eyes close, though she suspected he remained alert even in rest. She wondered what had brought him here, to this terrible place, alone and wounded. What had he lost? What was he fighting for? The questions followed her into dreams filled with fire and falling stars. Morning arrived with a cacophony of alien birdsong and the distant roars of creatures awakening to hunt. Grant was already up, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. When he noticed she watching him, he offered a ration cube and a small container of water. "Breakfast," he said simply. "Eat up. We've got a long day ahead." She accepted both gratefully. As she ate, Grant studied a holographic map projected from his wrist device, occasionally muttering to himself. Finally, he deactivated it and turned to she. "My ship went down about 20 clicks north of here," he explained, pointing in what she assumed was the relevant direction. "Rescue beacon's still active, but," he frowned, looking at She's wristband. "What's that thing? Some kind of communicator?" She followed his gaze to her band, still pulsing its steady red warning. She touched it, then made a searching gesture, trying to convey its purpose. Grant seemed to understand. "Tracker? Emergency signal?" When she nodded, he looked thoughtful. "Not working right." She shook her head. The band had been designed to summon help from her people's ships or settlements. But there was no response, only the endless red pulse that seemed more like a taunt with each passing hour. Grant considered this information. "Maybe we can boost the signal somehow, get it to connect with my beacon." He reached for the band, then paused, seeking permission with a raised eyebrow. She hesitated before extending her arm. The band was technically a restraint, a way for the elders to monitor refugee children who might otherwise wander into danger. She had always resented it, until now, when its signal represented her only hope for rescue. Grant examined the device without touching it, respectful of her apparent reluctance. "Interesting tech," he murmured. "Different from ours, but—" He tapped his own wrist device. "Maybe compatible." A sudden noise outside interrupted his assessment. Something large moving through the undergrowth. Grant was on his feet instantly, rifle ready, motioning for She to stay back. But whatever creature prowled nearby eventually moved on, its heavy footfalls fading into the distance. "We can't stay here," Grant said, once he was certain the danger had passed. "That thing might come back with friends." He gathered his limited supplies, ensuring everything was secure before turning to She. "Can you walk on that leg?" She tested her weight gingerly. The wound still hurt, but the human's treatment had reduced the pain significantly. She took a few experimental steps and nodded. "Good," Grant said. "Stay close to me. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. Got it?" Though she didn't catch every word, she understood the gist of his instructions. She nodded again, more firmly this time. They emerged from their tree hollow into a jungle transformed by daylight. The massive black trunks rose like pillars supporting a cathedral of leaves, through which sunlight filtered in dappled patterns. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. Now, every shadow concealed potential death. Grant moved with the quiet confidence of a predator, each step deliberate, each pause calculated to listen and observe. She did her best to mimic his movements, though her smaller size made navigating the tangled undergrowth challenging. More than once, Grant had to wait while she struggled through particularly dense vegetation. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when the attack came, swift and nearly silent. Two creatures similar to the previous night's attackers dropped from the canopy above, landing directly in their path. Grant's rifle was up and firing before she could even process the threat, dropping one creature immediately. The second launched itself at him, forcing him to defend with the butt of his weapon. She scrambled backward, tripping over exposed roots in her haste to escape. As she fell, her wristband suddenly flared with an intense blue light, so bright it momentarily blinded her. There was a strange sensation in her arm, a tingling that spread rapidly through her body. And then, a pulse of energy erupted from the band, striking the creature attacking Grant. The beast was flung backward, as though hit by an invisible hammer, crashing into a tree trunk with bone-crushing force. It slid to the ground, unmoving. Grant and she stared at each other in equal shock. "What the hell was that?" Grant finally asked, lowering his rifle. She looked at her wristband, now glowing a steady blue instead of pulsing red. She shook her head slowly, just as confused as he was. Grant approached cautiously, examining the creature he had shot, then the one apparently killed by She's mysterious power. He knelt beside She, his expression a mix of wariness and wonder. "You didn't know it could do that?" he asked, gesturing to the band. She shook her head again, touching the device with tentative fingers. The blue glow remained constant, warm against her skin where it had previously been cool. Something had changed, or awakened. Grant seemed to make a decision. "Look, we need to keep moving, but—" He pointed to the band, then to She, then made a gesture that clearly asked if she was okay. She considered the question. She felt strange, energized yet drained simultaneously, as though something had flowed through her rather than from her. But she wasn't hurt. She nodded, pushing herself to her feet with new determination. They continued their journey, now with an added layer of tension. Grant kept glancing at She's wristband, while she herself felt increasingly aware of a subtle vibration emanating from the device. It wasn't unpleasant, just present, like a heartbeat not her own. As midday approached, the jungle grew hotter and more oppressive. Moisture hung in the air, making each breath feel heavy. Grant called a halt beside a small stream, where they refilled their water containers and rested in the relative coolness of the flowing water. "Ship should be about another day's walk," Grant said, studying his map again. "If we're lucky." He looked at She, his expression softening slightly. "You're doing good, kid. Tough as they come." She didn't need to understand his exact words to recognize praise. She ducked her head in the same gesture as before. But this time, she attempted a human smile. It felt strange on her features but seemed to please Grant, who smiled back. A genuine one this time that crinkled the corners of his eyes. For a moment, they were just two people sharing a brief respite, not representatives of species locked in a complex galactic conflict. The moment was shattered by distant thunder, or what they initially took for thunder. Grant's expression changed instantly, alert and wary. "That's not weather," he said, rising to his feet. "That's heavy ordnance." She looked at him questioningly. "Explosions," Grant clarified, mimicking a blast with his hands. "Big ones. Could be a battle. Or something worse." He scanned the canopy, apparently trying to pinpoint the direction of the sounds. After a moment, he shook his head. "Hard to tell with the echo. Could be anywhere within 50 clicks. The implications hung between them. If there was fighting nearby, it could mean rescue or additional danger." Grant seemed to weigh their options before coming to a decision. "We stick to the plan. Head for my ship." He looked at She's wristband, still glowing blue. "And maybe figure out what that thing can really do." They resumed their trek, now moving with greater urgency. The jungle seemed to respond to their haste, throwing more obstacles in their path, vines that caught at ankles, insects that swarmed in clouds of biting fury, patches of ground that gave way unexpectedly. By late afternoon, both were exhausted and increasingly jumpy. When they finally stopped to make camp for the night, Grant chose a relatively defensible position, a rocky outcropping that provided shelter on three sides, with a clear view of the approach. He gathered branches and created a rudimentary barricade across the open side, then hesitated. "Fire would be good for keeping predators away," he said, mostly to himself. "But it would also announce our position to anything hunting by sight." He glanced at She, who was huddled against the rock wall, her small frame shivering despite the humid heat. "Cold, huh?" Shy wasn't actually cold. The shivering was a reaction to stress and exhaustion, but she nodded anyway, recognizing the concern in Grant's voice. With a sigh, Grant reached into one of his many pouches and withdrew what looked like a small metallic disc. He pressed its center, and it began to emit a gentle warmth without any visible flame or smoke. "Heat pack," he explained, handing it to She. "Not much, but better than nothing." She accepted the device gratefully, holding it close to her chest. The warmth spread through her, easing some of the tension from her muscles. She watched as Grant arranged their meager supplies, setting aside rations for their evening meal and checking his weapon one more time. As darkness fell, strange sounds emerged from the jungle, screeches, howls, and calls that seemed to defy natural classification. Grant kept his rifle across his lap, eyes constantly scanning their perimeter. She found herself scooting closer to him, drawn to his calm competence in the face of their shared peril. After they had eaten, Grant surprised her by speaking about himself for the first time. "Had a daughter," he said quietly, staring into the darkness beyond their camp. "Back on Terra Nova. She'd be a little older than you now, I think." He glanced at She. Hard to tell with different species, but she had that same look in her eyes. Curious, brave. She tilted her head, not understanding all his words, but sensing the importance of what he was sharing. Grant continued, his voice barely audible above the jungle's nocturnal chorus. "Lost her in a raid. Colonial uprising. Wrong place. Wrong time." His hands tightened on his rifle. "That's why I'm here. Tracking the group responsible. They—" He stopped, the words seeming to catch in his throat. "They use these planets as breeding grounds for bioweapons. These monsters? They're engineered, designed to kill." She's third eye widened in shock. She understood enough to grasp the horror of what he was describing. The creatures that had been hunting them weren't natural predators, but artificial horrors, created for war. Grant seemed to realize he might be frightening her, and forced a smile. "Don't worry. I've dealt with worse. We'll make it to the ship, and I'll get you somewhere safe." He hesitated, then added, "I promise." The word struck She with unexpected force. Promises were sacred among her people, bonds of honor not lightly given or taken. That this human would offer such a pledge to her, a child of a species he had every reason to distrust, meant more than he could possibly know. She touched her wristband, now pulsing between red and blue in an unpredictable pattern. She looked at Grant and said one of the few human words she knew with confidence. "Promise." Something changed in Grant's expression, a softening, a recognition of shared understanding. He nodded once, a solemn acknowledgement of their pact. That night, she slept more soundly than she had since the crash, despite the uncomfortable ground and the distant sounds of predators. When nightmares threatened, the steady presence of Grant nearby, watchful, protective, drove them back into the shadows where they belonged. Morning arrived with a new threat. Rain. Not the gentle precipitation of their first encounter, but a torrential downpour that transformed the jungle into a sodden maze. Water coursed down the rock face that had sheltered them, creating impromptu waterfalls that quickly saturated everything in their small camp. "Monsoon season," Grant growled, hastily packing their supplies before they could be ruined. "Just what we needed." The deluge complicated their journey enormously. Paths that had been passable the day before were now swollen streams or muddy bogs. Visibility dropped to mere meters, forcing them to navigate almost blind in some areas. The constant roar of rain against leaves made it impossible to hear approaching threats until they were dangerously close. They had several near misses. A snake-like creature that dropped from a branch directly in Grant's path. A pack of smaller predators that seemed more interested in shelter than hunting. A massive plant that snapped at She with tooth-lined leaves. Each time, Grant's quick reflexes or She's growing alertness saved them from disaster. By midday, they were soaked to the skin and fighting exhaustion. Grant called a halt beneath an enormous fallen tree, its upturned root system creating a partial cave. As they huddled in this makeshift shelter, She noticed that her wristband was now pulsing in a regular pattern. Blue, red, blue, red. The transitions were smooth, almost hypnotic. Grant noticed it too. "That thing's getting weirder by the hour," he commented, wringing water from his clothing. "Any idea what it's trying to tell you?" She shook her head, though she wasn't entirely truthful. She didn't understand the band's behavior, but she had begun to sense a connection between its pulses and her own emotional state. When she was afraid, it leaned toward red. When determined or hopeful, blue dominated. It was responding to her somehow. As if to confirm this theory, the band shifted to a steady blue glow when she focused on this realization. Grant raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment further. Instead, he checked his map again, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "We're off course," he admitted finally. "This damn rain has pushed us too far east. Ship's beacon is still active, but—" He sighed heavily. "We're looking at another 2 days of travel, minimum. And that's if the weather improves." Shai understood enough to grasp their predicament. 2 more days in this monster-infested jungle, with dwindling supplies and increasing fatigue. The odds were not in their favor. As if summoned by these dark thoughts, a roar echoed through the rain, closer than any they had heard that day. Grant was instantly alert, rifle ready. She pressed herself against the curved wall of roots, her wristband flaring bright blue. "That sounded big," Grant whispered. "Really big." The roar came again, followed by a crashing sound that could only be something massive moving through the undergrowth. It was heading directly toward them. Grant made a quick decision. "We can't outrun it in this terrain. We make a stand here." He positioned himself at the entrance to their shelter, rifle braced against his shoulder. "Stay behind me. If things go south, you run. Don't look back, just run." Shai wanted to protest, to insist they face the threat together. But the words wouldn't come, not in his language or hers. Instead, she focused on her wristband, willing its blue light to brighten, to become the weapon it had briefly been during their previous encounter. The band responded, its glow intensifying until it cast eerie shadows across the root cave. The creature that emerged from the rain was like nothing they had yet encountered, a behemoth that walked on 6 legs. Its body covered in overlapping plates that shed water in sheets. Its head was dominated by a bony crest that swept backward from multiple eyes, and its jaws could easily engulf either of them whole. Grant fired a burst, the projectiles striking the creature's armored hide with minimal effect. It roared in irritation rather than pain, focusing its attention fully on their hiding place. "Damn it," Grant muttered, adjusting his weapon settings. "Armor's too thick for standard rounds." The beast charged. Grant fired again, this time aiming for the creature's eyes. The strategy proved more effective. The monster veered off with a screech of pain, crashing into the fallen tree above them. The impact sent tremors through their shelter, dislodging clods of earth and root fragments. "That won't stop it for long," Grant warned, already reloading. "We need to move." But before they could escape, the creature attacked again, this time from a different angle. Its massive head thrust into their shelter, jaws snapping barely a meter from where they stood. Grant fired point blank, the shots deafening in the confined space. But the beast seemed beyond caring about its injuries now. driven by rage or hunger or programming. It would not stop until they were dead. She felt a strange calm descend over her. The band on her wrist pulsed in perfect synchronization with her heartbeat. Its blue glow, now so intense, it seemed to pierce the gloom like a miniature star. Without conscious thought, she stepped forward, extending her arm toward the creature. No! Grant shouted, trying to pull her back. But it was too late. A beam of blue light erupted from the band, striking the creature directly between its many eyes. The monster froze, then began to convulse, its massive body thrashing in what appeared to be agony. After several seconds that felt like an eternity, it collapsed, sliding backward out of their shelter to lie motionless in the rain. She stared at her wrist in wonder and fear. The band continued to glow blue, though less intensely now. She felt drained but exhilarated, as though she had tapped into some power that had always been within her, waiting to be discovered. Grant approached the fallen creature cautiously, rifle still raised. After confirming it was dead, he returned to She, his expression a complex mix of emotions. "That was impressive," he said finally, "and a little terrifying." He knelt to examine her wristband more closely, careful not to touch it. "This isn't just a tracker, is it?" Xi shook her head slowly. She was beginning to understand that the band was something far more significant than she had been told, perhaps even than her elders had known. It wasn't controlling her. She was controlling it, channeling something from deep within herself through the device. Grant seemed to reach a similar conclusion. "Your people. They have abilities I haven't seen before. This tech, it's not just advanced, it's different. Like it's designed to work with your biology specifically." He looked up at She's face. "Do all your people have this capability?" She considered the question, then shook her head again. If others possessed such powers, surely they would have been used in defense when her people were driven from their home system. The band must be unique, or she was. Either possibility was equally unsettling. "We should keep moving," Grant said after a moment, respecting her apparent discomfort with the topic. "That thing might have friends, and the noise could attract other predators." They ventured back into the downpour, now moving with renewed purpose despite their fatigue. She found herself more aware of the band's presence, its gentle warmth, a reminder of untapped potential. Occasionally, she would focus her thoughts, causing the device to brighten or dim at will. Each success gave her a small thrill of accomplishment and hope. The rain continued unabated as day faded into night, forcing them to seek shelter once again. This time, Grant discovered a small cave in the base of a cliff face, well hidden behind a curtain of vines. The interior was dry and showed no signs of recent occupation by predators, a rare stroke of luck in their journey. As they established their camp, Grant took time to check She's leg wound, changing the bandage and applying more of the healing gel. The injury was healing well, with no signs of infection. "Good immune system," Grant commented. "Guess your people evolved some pretty effective defenses." She couldn't explain that her people's resilience came not from evolution, but engineering. Generations of genetic manipulation designed to help them survive on harsh, inhospitable worlds. It was one of many reasons they were both valued and feared by other species in the galaxy. They shared another meager meal from Grant's dwindling supplies, huddled near another heat pack as the temperature dropped with nightfall. Outside, the rain finally began to ease, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost more unnerving than the constant downpour had been. "Should reach the ship by midday tomorrow if we maintain a good pace," Grant said, studying his map one last time, before shutting down his wrist device to conserve power. "Assuming no more giant monsters or flash floods." He leaned back against the cave wall, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position. Xi noticed that he was favoring his left side. The shoulder injury from their earlier skirmish was clearly bothering him more than he let on. Without prompting, She moved closer and gestured to his shoulder, then to the medical kit. Grant seemed surprised by her initiative, but nodded. Might as well, while we've got the chance. He carefully removed the upper portion of his armor, revealing a compression suit beneath. The area around the wound was inflamed, the temporary patch barely containing seepage. She worked carefully, cleaning and redressing the injury with growing confidence. Grant remained stoic throughout, though she could tell from his tense muscles that the process was painful. "You're a fast learner," he said when she finished. "Reminds me of—" He stopped himself, his expression clouding. "Anyway, thanks." She sensed the unfinished thought was about his daughter. She hesitated, then placed her small hand on his uninjured arm, a gesture of comfort that required no translation. Grant's smile was fleeting but genuine. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "I'll take first watch." She settled into a relatively comfortable position near the back of the cave, her wristband providing a soft blue nightlight. As exhaustion overtook her, she found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought her here, from refugee to crash survivor to wielder of mysterious power. And throughout it all, the unlikely protection of a human soldier who had every reason to consider her an enemy, but had instead become her guardian. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was a simple question. What would happen when, if, they reached Grant's ship? Would their fragile alliance end? Would she be sent to some human facility, studied for her unusual abilities? Or worse, would she be abandoned once again, left to fend for herself in a universe that had shown her little kindness? The questions remained unanswered as dreams took her far from the cave and its worries. She awoke to Grant's hand on her shoulder, gently shaking her. He whispered urgently. "Wake up!" Shai blinked rapidly, disoriented by the abrupt transition from sleep to wakefulness. Grant's expression immediately put her on alert. Tension radiated from him like heat. "We've got company," he said, gesturing toward the cave entrance. "Lots of it." Ishi strained her ears and soon caught what Grant had already detected, a chorus of chittering sounds, growing louder with each passing moment. Multiple creatures, approaching from different directions. "They're hunting as a pack," Grant explained, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Must have picked up our scent." He glanced at Shi's wristband, now pulsing between red and blue as her anxiety mounted. "Think you can do that light beam trick again if needed?" She wasn't sure. The previous instances had been largely instinctual, driven by immediate danger. Could she summon the power at will? She gave a hesitant nod, unwilling to admit her uncertainty. Grant seemed to read her doubt regardless. "Only if necessary," he assured her. "Save your strength. We might need it for a last resort." They gathered their few belongings quickly, preparing to move at a moment's notice. Grant positioned himself near the cave entrance, occasionally peering out through the curtain of vines to assess the threat. His expression grew increasingly grim. "Too many to fight," he concluded finally. "We need to run." He turned to Shi, his decision made. "There's a ravine about half a click east of here. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them in the undergrowth. Ready?" She nodded, her small frame tense with anticipation. The band on her wrist glowed steadily blue now, not the intense beam of battle, but a constant reminder of potential. "On my mark," Grant said, listening intently to the movements outside. 3, 2, 1, now. They burst from the cave, Grant leading with his rifle already firing at the nearest creatures, smaller versions of the ones they had encountered before, but no less deadly for their reduced size. She followed close behind, dodging between startled predators with surprising agility. The jungle was a blur of motion and sound as they ran. Creatures screeched in pursuit, their multiple limbs allowing them to navigate the difficult terrain with frightening speed. Grant fired precise bursts to clear their path, never wasting ammunition on impossible shots. She focused on keeping pace, her leg wound, protesting but holding. They were perhaps halfway to the ravine when disaster struck. Grant's foot caught on a hidden root, sending him sprawling into a tangle of vegetation. His rifle clattered away, landing several meters distant. Before he could recover, two of the pursuing creatures were upon him, their claws and teeth seeking vulnerable flesh. She skidded to a halt, terror and determination warring within her. The band on her wrist flared brilliantly blue, responding to her emotional surge. Without conscious thought, she directed its energy at the nearest attacker, the beam striking with enough force to fling the creature into the undergrowth. Grant used the momentary advantage to reach for his combat knife, driving it deep into the second creature's eye socket. It fell with a gurgling screech, black fluid spurting from the wound. More were coming. She could hear them crashing through the jungle, drawn by the commotion. Grant struggled to his feet, retrieving his rifle with a grunt of pain. Blood soaked his left sleeve, a new injury to complement the existing one. "Thanks," he gasped, giving She a quick nod of appreciation. "Let's move." They resumed their flight, though Grant's pace was noticeably slower now. She stayed close, occasionally glancing back to monitor their pursuit. The creatures seemed to be holding a consistent distance, not gaining, but not falling behind either. The ravine appeared ahead, a jagged cut in the jungle floor that dropped away into shadow. Grant stumbled to its edge, breathing heavily. "Down there," he said, pointing to a narrow path that switchbacked along the ravine wall. "Careful, it's steep." They began their descent, the path crumbling beneath their feet in places. The pursuing creatures hesitated at the ravine's edge, their predatory instincts apparently warring with caution. Finally, hunger or programming won out, and they started down the path after their prey. Grant and She had almost reached the bottom when a new sound cut through the jungle's cacophony, a mechanical whine that grew rapidly louder. Grant froze, his head tilting upward. "Aircraft," he said, his voice tight with hope and disbelief. "Human design." She followed his gaze, but saw nothing through the dense canopy. The sound continued to grow, now accompanied by a downdraft that bent the treetops and sent debris swirling through the air. Grant grabbed She's hand. "Come on! We need to find a clearing, somewhere they can see us!" They abandoned the relative safety of the ravine, climbing back up via a different route that led away from their pursuers. The creatures, confused by their quarry's change in direction, milled about briefly before resuming the chase with renewed vigor. Grant and She emerged onto relatively level ground, pushing through dense vegetation in search of any break in the canopy. The aircraft sounds were directly overhead now, the distinctive rhythm of military engines unmistakable to Grant's trained ear. "There!" he shouted, pointing to a small gap in the trees ahead. Sunlight poured through, creating a golden column in the dim jungle interior. "That's our shot!" They sprinted for the clearing, the pursuing creatures gaining ground with every step. Grant's injuries were slowing him considerably, but he refused to leave She behind, maintaining a grip on her hand that was both protective and encouraging. They burst into the sunlit space just as the first of their pursuers emerged from the undergrowth behind them. Grant raised his rifle one-handed, firing to keep the creatures at bay while scanning the sky above. She's wristband was pulsing rapidly now, alternating between red and blue in a dizzying pattern. She focused her attention on it, willing the device to send a signal that might attract their potential rescuers. To her surprise, the band responded with a vertical beam of blue light that shot upward through the canopy opening, a beacon that would be visible for kilometers. "Perfect," Grant breathed, glancing at the light with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "They can't miss that." The creatures had surrounded the clearing now, their chittering calls creating a nightmarish chorus. They seemed hesitant to enter the open space, preferring the shadows of the jungle's edge, but their patience was clearly wearing thin. Several made tentative advances, only to retreat when Grant fired warning shots. "Ammo's running low," he admitted quietly to She. "Maybe 20 rounds left." He glanced upward again, willing the aircraft to appear. "Come on, come on." As if in answer to his plea, a massive shadow passed over the clearing, a human military transport, its engines roaring as it circled their position. A hatch opened in its underside, and a spotlight beam lanced down, sweeping the area until it found them. The creatures reacted violently to the light, some fleeing back into the jungle while others became more aggressive, sensing their prey might escape. One particularly large specimen charged directly at She, moving too quickly for Grant to target. She raised her arm instinctively, the band flaring with blue energy. This time, she consciously directed the power, shaping it not into a beam, but a shield that surrounded both her and Grant. The creature struck the invisible barrier and recoiled, screeching in confusion and pain. "That's new," Grant commented, his eyes wide with surprise. "And handy." From the transport above, a rescue harness descended, swinging slightly in the downdraft from the engines. Grant grabbed it with his good arm, securing it around She's small frame. "You first," he insisted, checking the connections. "I'll cover you." She shook her head vehemently, unwilling to leave Grant behind. She pushed the harness away, pointing to his injuries and then to the sky, her meaning clear. He needed rescue more urgently. "Not happening, kid," Grant said firmly. "I promised to get you to safety, remember. A promise is a promise." The creatures were growing bolder, encouraged by the apparent distraction of their quarry. Several were now advancing into the clearing from different directions, forcing Grant to divide his attention and ammunition. She made a sudden decision. She extended her arm, focusing all her concentration on the band. The blue glow intensified, then expanded outward in a pulse that knocked the nearest creatures back into the undergrowth. In the momentary respite this created, she grabbed the harness and secured it around Grant before he could protest. What are you?" His question was cut short as she reached for his wrist device and pressed what she hoped was the signal button. The harness immediately began to retract, lifting Grant clear of the ground as he struggled futilely against the restraints. "No, She stepped back, watching as he was drawn upward toward safety. The creatures, momentarily stunned by her energy pulse, were recovering quickly. Soon, they would attack again, and she had no guarantee she could summon another shield or blast. Grant was shouting something from above, his words lost in the roar of the transport's engines. She understood regardless. He was promising to return for her, to not leave her behind. She believed him, but first, he needed to live. As the first of the creatures charged toward her, she closed her eyes and concentrated on the band once more. This time, she didn't attempt to project energy outward. Instead, she focused inward, willing the device to respond to a different need. The blue glow faded entirely, replaced by darkness. The band became inert on her wrist, its light and power seemingly extinguished. She opened her eyes to see the charging creature almost upon her, and then it veered away, as though it could no longer see or sense her presence. The other predators exhibited similar confusion, their movements becoming erratic, their attention shifting elsewhere. Within moments, they began to disperse, losing interest in a prey they could no longer detect. She remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The band had responded to her desire for concealment, apparently masking whatever signals the creatures used to track their quarry. It wasn't invisibility. She could still see herself clearly, but something more subtle and, in this moment, infinitely more valuable. Above, Grant had been pulled into the transport. Ji saw his face appear at the hatch, scanning the clearing with growing desperation. She wanted to signal him, to let him know she was alive, but feared breaking whatever camouflage the band had provided. Instead, she watched as the transport hovered uncertainly, its spotlight sweeping the area repeatedly. After what seemed an eternity, it began to ascend, withdrawing from the increasingly agitated jungle predators that had begun to target it instead. She felt a pang of loss as the aircraft disappeared from view, though it was tempered by relief that Grant was safe. She had no doubt he would return as promised. The question was whether she could survive until then. With the creatures temporarily confused, she took the opportunity to retreat back into the deeper jungle, seeking shelter where she could wait for rescue. The band remained dark, its powers dormant, but not gone. She sensed that she had only begun to discover what it, and by extension, she, was capable of. She found a suitable hiding place in the hollow remains of a fallen giant, its massive trunk providing both concealment and protection from the elements. As she settled into her refuge, exhaustion overtook her, the events of the day catching up with her small body. Despite her efforts to remain vigilant, sleep claimed her within minutes. She awoke to vibration, not from her wristband, but from the ground beneath her. The hollow trunk shook with rhythmic impacts that could only be the footfalls of something enormous. She held her breath, pressing herself against the inner curve of her shelter as a shadow darkened its entrance. A massive head lowered, reptilian eyes peering into the hollow. It was larger than any creature they had yet encountered, its scales iridescent in the filtered sunlight. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought discovery was inevitable. But then the beast snorted once and withdrew, apparently deciding the trunk was empty. Shy waited until the vibrations faded before allowing herself to breathe normally again. The band remained dark, still performing its camouflage function even as she slept. She tentatively focused on it, wondering if she could reactivate its more visible powers. The device responded immediately, glowing blue once more. She quickly reversed her mental command, returning it to darkness. The ease with which she now controlled the band was both exhilarating and unsettling. What else might it be capable of with proper guidance? Hours passed. She remained in her hiding place, occasionally venturing to its entrance to scan for threats or signs of rescue. The jungle continued its constant symphony of sounds, but nothing approached the distinctive engine noise of the transport. As twilight began to descend, she faced a difficult decision: remain hidden and hope for rescue, or attempt to reach Grant's ship on her own. The latter option was fraught with danger, especially now that darkness was falling, but waiting passively felt increasingly futile. Before she could decide, a new sound cut through the jungle's nocturnal awakening, a series of controlled explosions in the distance, followed by the unmistakable report of weapons fire. A battle, or perhaps a rescue operation. Shy emerged from her shelter, the band still dark on her wrist. She oriented herself toward the sounds, trying to estimate distance and direction. The weapons fire was sporadic but intense, suggesting a determined push against resistance. Grant had returned as promised, and he had brought reinforcements. With renewed hope, she began moving cautiously toward the commotion. The band's camouflage effect kept larger predators at bay, though she still had to avoid physical contact with the jungle's many hazards. Progress was slow, but steady, each step bringing her closer to the increasingly distinct sounds of combat. She had covered perhaps half the distance when the sky above erupted with light, flares designed to illuminate the battlefield below. In their harsh glare, she caught glimpses of armored figures moving through the undergrowth ahead, their weapons trained on targets she couldn't yet see. Human soldiers, a rescue team. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Should she reveal herself? The band's concealment had kept her safe from predators. But would these humans recognize her as the child Grant had tried to save? Or would they see only an alien, a potential enemy? The decision was made for her when a familiar voice called out above the tactical chatter of the soldiers. She, where are you?" Grant, alive and searching for her. Without further hesitation, she focused on her wristband, willing it to glow once more. The blue light emerged, pulsing steadily, like a beacon. She stepped forward, moving toward the sound of Grant's voice with growing confidence. She found him at the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by heavily armed soldiers who were establishing a perimeter against jungle threats. Grant's left arm was in a medical sling, and fresh bandages covered multiple injuries. But he was upright and alert. When he caught sight of Shi's approaching blue light, his face transformed with relief and joy. "Shi," he called, breaking away from the group to meet her. He knelt, examining her with concern. "Are you hurt? How did you—" He shook his head, amazement overriding questions. "Never mind. You're alive. That's what matters." She smiled, understanding his relief because she felt the same at seeing him again. She pointed to his injuries, her expression questioning. "I'll live," Grant assured her. "Medics patched me up enough to lead the rescue mission." He glanced back at the soldiers, who were watching their exchange with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. "Had to call in some favors, convince some skeptical officers that there was a survivor worth saving." He turned back to Shi, his expression serious. "That thing you did with your band, the energy pulse, the shield, that saved both our lives, and then disappearing like that. How did you do it?" She touched the band, now glowing steadily blue. She didn't have the words to explain what she barely understood herself, how the device seemed to respond to her will, channeling powers she hadn't known she possessed. Grant seemed to understand her difficulty. "It's okay. There'll be time for questions later." He stood, extending his good hand to her. "For now, let's get you to safety. The transport's waiting." She placed her small hand in his without hesitation. As they walked toward the perimeter of soldiers, she noticed many of them staring at her wristband with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. One officer stepped forward, blocking their path. "Grant, we need to talk about this," the officer said, eyeing Shi warily. "Command's gonna want answers about whatever that is." He nodded toward the glowing band. "Later," Grant replied firmly. The mission parameters were clear: extract the survivor and return to base. Questions can wait until we're not standing in the middle of Predator territory. As if to emphasize his point, a distant roar echoed through the jungle. The officer grimaced but stepped aside, issuing orders to his team to prepare for immediate extraction. The journey to the transport was swift and well protected, with soldiers forming a defensive cordon around Shi and Grant. Despite their efficiency, they encountered several predators drawn by the activity and light, resulting in brief but intense skirmishes. Throughout, Shi remained close to Grant, her band glowing steadily, as though ready to provide defense if needed. When they reached the waiting transport, a larger version of the craft that had rescued Grant earlier, medics immediately approached to examine Shi. She shied away from their unfamiliar hands, pressing closer to Grant's side. "It's okay," he assured her. "They just want to make sure you're not hurt." When she still hesitated, he added, "I'll stay right here. Promise." That word again, promise. She relaxed slightly, allowing the medics to check her vital signs and examine her leg wound. They spoke to each other in technical terms she couldn't follow, but their gentle handling suggested they found no immediate concerns. As the transport lifted off, she moved to a viewport, watching the jungle recede beneath them. The massive black trees that had seemed so threatening from below now appeared almost beautiful from this perspective. A dark tapestry spread across the landscape, hiding its dangers beneath a deceptively peaceful canopy. Grant joined her, his own gaze fixed on the diminishing world below. "Never thought I'd make it off this rock," he admitted quietly, "let alone with company." She glanced up at him, noting the weariness in his features, but also a new lightness, as though some burden had been partially lifted. She wondered if finding her, protecting her, had in some small way helped heal the wound left by his daughter's loss. The thought made her reach for his hand, her small purple fingers intertwining with his larger human ones. Grant looked down, surprised by the gesture, then gently squeezed in acknowledgement. "What happens now?" he asked, more to himself than to she. "Where do you go from here?" She had been wondering the same thing. Her people were scattered, the refugee transport destroyed. She had no home, no family to return to. Yet, for the first time since the crash, these realizations didn't fill her with despair. She had survived against impossible odds. She had discovered powers within herself that she never knew existed. And she had found an ally, perhaps even a friend, in the most unlikely of places. Grant seemed to read her thoughts in her expression. "Don't worry," he said softly. "We'll figure it out." He hesitated, then added, "Together, if you want." She's third eye widened slightly, an expression of hope in her species. She nodded, her decision made without need for further consideration. As the transport accelerated toward the stars, she noticed something in the corner of the cargo bay, a datapad forgotten or discarded among supplies. Curiosity drew her toward it, the screen still active and displaying a message that caught her attention. Grant followed, picking up the device when she pointed to it. His expression changed as he read the text: surprise, then understanding, then grim determination. "The child is the key," he read aloud, the words clearly significant though their meaning remained obscure. "Hope." He looked from the message to she, then to her wristband, still glowing with steady blue light. Something profound passed between them in that moment, a recognition that their meeting had not been mere chance, that larger forces were at work in the galaxy, and that she's mysterious powers might be more important than either of them had imagined. "Guess we've got work to do," Grant said finally, shutting down the datapad and securing it in a pocket. "When you're ready." She nodded solemnly. She was no longer just a lost child, a refugee without a home. She was something more, though what, exactly, remained to be discovered. The band pulsed gently on her wrist, a reminder of untapped potential waiting to be explored. For now, though, she was content to stand beside her unlikely protector, watching as the transport carried them away from danger and toward an uncertain but promising future. The jungle planet diminished to a dark sphere behind them, its monsters and perils fading with distance. Grant linked his little finger with hers, a gesture he had once shared with his daughter, though she couldn't know this. "Promise?" he asked simply. Shai understood. A pledge to face whatever came next together, to protect each other, to find answers to the mysteries that surrounded them. She returned the gesture, her small finger wrapping around his. "Promise," she replied, the word coming easily now in his language. As the world below receded into a distant point of light, both human and alien gazed forward into the star-filled void. She's wristband pulsed in perfect harmony with her heartbeat, its blue glow a beacon of possibility in the vastness of space. Whatever future awaited them, whatever challenges or wonders lay ahead, they would face it not as victims of circumstance, but as allies united by survival, trust, and the most powerful force in any galaxy: hope.